Okay.
So today I'd like to welcome a wonderful author I'm looking forward to talking to about all things consciousness, um, Dr. Eben Alexander. Welcome.
Well, Susie, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be with you today.
Lovely, thank you. So I wanted to chat to you. I'm loving your books, and you are saying some very interesting things about consciousness and this existence that we live in as human beings. So I'd very much like to begin with your story to put into context the story of your near-death experience, and we start there.
Okay.
So could you tell us a
Right.
little?
Important. I think it's important to point out that I had spent the first 54 years of my life honing a very kind of scientific materialist worldview, the physicalism, the notion that only the physical world exists and therefore the brain must somehow be producing consciousness out of physical matter. And my father, my adoptive father, had been very important in that because he was a neurosurgeon. And but he had a strong belief in God and the power of prayer, and he used it in his healing all the time, but he was also very scientific. So for him, there was never any conflict. For me, there was, I always knew science was the pathway to truth, and I made the mistake, like many people, of thinking that that uh, materialist science was that pathway. But in fact, I've come to realize that a much more quantum informed version is what we need for reality. And that is based on my personal experience, plus work with hundreds of scientists around the world over the last 14 years since the coma. But the things about the coma that were so remarkable, and this was all confirmed in a medical case report written by three doctors not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery. That case report was in Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in September 2018. And they made the point, as I made in Proof of Heaven, but they were much more firm about it, having a lot more time to go through the records, et cetera. They said my brain was in no shape to have any kind of dream or hallucination
Mm.
or confabulation, and also that my survival and my full recovery was a real surprise. Medically speaking, it appeared to be kind of a miraculous healing, which they actually attributed to the fact that I had a near-death experience.
Mm.
And the features of that experience, just briefly, uh, one point very important to make is that I was amnesic. I had no memory of Eben Alexander's life. And that's unusual for a near-death experience, but it only means it was incomplete. But to me, the things that it showed me were so profound, especially against the backdrop of evidence for objective damage to my brain. And my journey started in a primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm that I call the earthworm's eye view, but I was rescued from that by a slowly spinning melody of light that basically served as a portal and took me up into a rich, ultra real Gateway Valley, much more real than this world. That's one thing people who haven't had an NDE have trouble understanding is how something could be much more real than this world, but there it is. And that's how people often describe it. And that's what I faced. And beautiful messages of love in that realm. And again, important to point out, this all occurred at a time when objective medical evidence showed my brain could not have supported any kind of phenomenal experience at all. That's the important thing about my case for the scientific community. In that beautiful Gateway Valley, I was welcomed by a spiritual being. Those who've read the book Proof of Heaven will realize how important she was 4 months after my coma in helping to validate the whole experience as really occurring, just not in the physical realm. And so, in that beautiful setting, that guardian angel gave me a message of love. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are deeply cared for, which I think is the ultimate message I was to bring back to share with all fellow beings. But it turns out that was not the end of my journey. It was, as we say, a gateway valley. And then what happened was I saw thousands of beings dancing in this meadow down below. I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing among millions of other butterflies. This beautiful guardian angel was with me on the butterfly wing. And then the angelic choirs above, which were fueling this incredible festivity and joy and merriment in the valley down below, they provided a portal to yet a higher level. I remember seeing all four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of this new spiritual level, this Gateway Valley with a different ordering of causality. Very important to point out, deep time or meta time, which is not so tied to our Earth time. Earth time allows for the drama to unfold here, but meta time and deep time shows you how you can have things like a life review where all the instants of your life are available to you, at once. Here they are. These are your life events for reliving, not just remembering. And it serves as lessons, as a course correction. So the life review is a beautiful example of how there's a whole different temporal causality involved in that spiritual level that allows for our growth, teaching and learning of these lessons. And then I got to what I call the core realm. That was my ultimate destination of pure oneness with that divine, infinitely loving source of all. And many lessons taught in the core. But what would happen is I'd oscillate, I'd go back down, spontaneously dropping into that earthworm eye view. And by remembering the musical notes, the melody, I could come back up into that brilliant Gateway Valley. And then the angelic choirs would always take me to that highest level of the core for more lessons. But I was always told you're not here to stay. And so there came a point at the end where I could no longer conjure up the musical notes of the melody that took me up from the earthworm eye view to the Gateway Valley. And at that point, I saw thousands of beings going off around me into the distance, heads bowed, all this murmuring energy coming from them. Um, and when I wrote it all up weeks later, I said that was the power of prayer. That's what I was witnessing, these thousands of beings that were ushering me back to this world. I didn't know where I was headed, but that's what was ultimately the plan. And and then I saw six faces, and the six faces helped because they were veridical time anchors that showed that the vast majority of the coma journey had to happen between days 1 and 5 or 1 and 4 of a 7-day coma. And then when I came back to this world, and important to point out, it was a sixth face in that group that was the catalyst bringing me back to this world. It was a 10-year-old boy, and I didn't know who it was. And that was day 7 of coma. The doctors had just held a family conference where they said I'd gone from 10% down to 2% chance of survival with no chance of recovery. And so it was time to stop medical care and let me go. And they'd protected Bond from the worst news during that week, but not that. And he heard that, knew things were much worse than they'd been presented to him, came running down the hallway into my room where I was lying on the hospital bed being ventilated, 12 times a minute by my ventilator, as I had been for 7 days. And he pulled open my eyelids and he was pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. And I promise you, I did not see him with my eyes. I didn't hear him with my ears. I was far gone from this world in that spiritual realm. But that got through to me. And for this whole journey, I believed it can continue or it can cease. It doesn't matter because my amnesia kind of protected me from any sense of responsibility and choice. But now all of a sudden, I realized I had to figure all this out. And Bond was really my kind of bond to this world and kind of led me back in this direction. And of course, when I first woke up in that ICU bed, my brain was still so wrecked from the meningitis, I did not even recognize loved ones at the bedside. My mother, my sisters, my sons had no idea who these beings were, had no language, but the language came back very rapidly, literally within minutes and hours of my waking up. Language was returning, personal memories of the next days and week or two, and all my semantic knowledge of neuroscience and cosmology came back over about 2 months. And we discuss all of the miracle of that, not only in book Proof of Heaven, but especially in the third book, co-written with my partner, life partner, Karen Newell. That book is called Living in a Mindful Universe. And that's where we go into a lot more of the details of my story and show how it kind of awakened me and now the scientific community with whom I work diligently and on a daily basis around the world in trying to better understand consciousness. The 14 years since my coma have been a tremendously rich period of growth and understanding and coming to realize that the whole scientific community is going through a gigantic 180-degree shift right now from materialism, which has held reign for a few centuries, to more of a form of idealism or the acknowledgement of the primacy of mind and consciousness. And that opens the door wide to the reality not only of the afterlife, but of reincarnation stories and things like that. So it's been an incredible journey. It was all catalyzed by that extraordinary uh, illness that in many ways was one of the greatest gifts of my life, was that meningoencephalitis.
Absolutely, I can understand that. I had brain cancer and was given 3 weeks to live. I just do a little bit of sharing. And
Oh,
yeah, and I knew it wasn't my story to expire. And I did have quite a strong spiritual sense anyway.
uh-huh.
I was a meditator. I knew there was a bigger force than we perhaps have been told or taught. And I had a near-death experience, came back, and the medical community the doctor actually said, we don't have an understanding of how this tumor has healed with no scar tissue. This looks like a miracle, although we're not in the business of miracles. I said, that's interesting, because I am, I prayed for this, and indeed it's happened. So I came back with no fear, a lot of the things you talk about, no fear, a sense of oneness. However, my story is very different. In terms of, as you point out, no one story is the same with these kind of things. And I wanted to point out that you were a skeptic, I believe, in your early years. I understood, have worked on many thousands of brains, and you really had not got a feeling that this element that we're talking about, this element of afterlife, it was credible as a neurosurgeon in your early years. Is that correct?
That is absolutely true. And it turns out, as I tell in the book, Proof of Heaven, I tell some stories of how my patients tried to educate me. They would share stories, phenomenal stories of these kind of mental, spiritual experiences. And, I must say, early in my life, under the influence of my adoptive father, who was so influential, and he had such an easy kind of symbiosis of religion, of spirituality, and science living within him. And to me, I wanted to believe, he took me to the Methodist churches when I was young. I wanted to believe a lot of what I heard there about an afterlife and this loving personal God. And all of that made sense. And prayer was there for me early on. But then the more I spent these decades working as a neurosurgeon, trying to study how the brain and consciousness are related, the more difficulty I ran into explaining how conscious awareness could survive the death of the brain and body. I just didn't have an understanding of how that could happen. And that's why I needed my mind open wide to the possibilities, because my NDE proved very profoundly that the brain is not the creator of consciousness. In fact, as Larry Dossey often says, we're conscious in spite of our brain. And I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. The brain is simply there to kind of focus conscious awareness to things that are important for survival of a biological organism. That doesn't mean that the nervous system is trying to show us any ultimate nature of reality. It's a very different kind of request. And my journey showed me very clearly that we have a much grander universe to explain here than just this simple little small material world that exists around us. And once you realize how important consciousness is and the power of our will, for example, in healing, like placebo effect, spontaneous remission, and then the miraculous healing from NDEs, you start to realize there's a tremendous power of spirit over matter. I used to call it kind of mind over matter, but Karen has educated me that it's much better to look at it as spirit over matter. Spirit is just implying that connectedness of all of our minds at that deeper level. Um, and it's just been an extraordinary journey of awakening. I now realize that science and spirituality cannot actually move forward without each other. They're absolutely demanding of each other. Quantum physics cannot be understood without a deeper understanding of idealism and the primacy of mind in the universe. And this is something that many quantum physicists have come to realize in the last few decades. Although some people who are fully engaged in quantum physics alone might completely miss the connection with brain, mind, consciousness, and the nature of reality. But it's right there front and center when that's what you're studying. And that's why I think the expansion going on in the scientific community now that fully embraces and opens up to the reality of afterlife and of reincarnation is an important step forward for humanity to understand our deeper nature.
I think this is a very exciting area because culturally, we are not taught necessarily to step out of the paradigm of materialism. What we see every day, we're guided to believe that this is it. There's not a bigger, expansive machine at work. And one of the problems I had after my NDE was that I felt not believed, and I felt to pull back on my story. And I've actually only just 4 years later started talking about it. I'm writing a book about it right now, because it's too fantastical and it's too much out of the paradigm of the ordinary. The fact now that our science and our spirituality are getting such an advanced levels that they can come together and live happily as bedfellows with one another. I have a very good friend. I'm writing my book, my new part of creativity book. He's a professor at Cambridge University on consciousness. He's very much a science man. He's very much data and research and results driven in his pursuit of the science of the brain, science of consciousness, the science of what happens to us when we are thinking conscious beings. My approach, I was very interested in my early years in psychology, and I studied and mastered in psychology, not really knowing this was my journey. One of the things I'd love to ask you about is that your sense of destiny. You have had this incredible story, and you now bless this so-called terrible event that you went through, which caused you this coma. But now you can see that it is a device that was used and a tool that was used to develop this greater awareness and this great story to share. When I was ill and going through the scanner, I was visited by these golden beings and explained to me that I will be writing a book about this experience of healing. I would have 3 scans, one a terrible scan showing that I was about to die, which is what happened. The second scan would show it shrunk, and the third would show it had completely gone miraculously. And this is indeed what happened. And I am writing the book about it now. So what I found is to hold back on telling my story because people would think ill of me, and it doesn't fit into a current mechanism of thought. But I'm very excited that the world, it feels like there is an awakening happening. There feels like that people now can accept these more expansive theories about life and consciousness.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that is what is going on. The near-death experiences are really the tip of the spear in waking the scientific community up to a much grander understanding of the nature of consciousness. And one of the main reasons I wrote the book, Proof of Heaven, was to help bring the medical scientists, doctors, physicians, nurses, etc. Of course, the nurses already get this. I'll give them full credit. They're usually there with the patients when they pass over. They've heard things from family and patients. They realize there's much more to this story than just materialism. But some of us doctors like me were a little slow on the uptake. I needed a big thumping to get it. But the important thing to point out here is that we've now moved beyond this being a debate between, science and religion and science and spirituality. Because in fact, last year there was a contest held that forever now answers the question of is there an afterlife or not? And it's in the affirmative, and this is from scientific, rigorous research, and it's available for free to all of your listeners at bigelowinstitute.org. Robert Bigelow is an aerospace engineer out in Las Vegas. He had a deep interest in the afterlife question because his wife had passed over and his son had committed suicide. So he wanted to know more about, where they were and how they were doing. And he put up some prize money. And the question was, what is the best scientific evidence for conscious awareness after permanent bodily death? And they actually received more than 1,000 inquiries. They demanded that people had to demonstrate at least 5 years of research experience in the afterlife question before an essay would be accepted. And with those conditions, they received 204 essays, and they came from all over the world. They were going to give prizes for 1, 2, and 3 place prizes. But then the quality of the submission was so extremely good that they ended up giving out 29 monetary awards. And all 29 of those winning essays are available for free at bigelowinstitute.org. And if you ever wondered about the afterlife, all you have to do is start reading those papers, and you'll realize the afterlife is absolutely real. In fact, you'll find a lot of evidence in those papers for reincarnation too. And it just shows us that the real world of human existence and of our mind and of our experiences is a much grander universe than just this simple little material universe. And we then discover the primacy and importance of consciousness itself. So if you start reading those essays, Jeffrey Mishlov's number one essay is well worth reading, and that will convince just about anyone of the reality of the afterlife. And really, it's high time that our whole society got on board with this because it's very important. How we treat others, how we treat ourselves, how we behave in this world is very important and matters to this universe. That's one thing you find, and that's why I think some materialists seem to be very frightened of this big reality that the empirical data supports, because it implies that they're responsible for their choices. They don't just get off the hook. So this is where taking responsibility for our planet is imperative. I would say we haven't done that very well in the last many decades. Our addiction to fossil fuels, corporate greed that's wrecking the planet with plastics and pollution and toxicity and carbon dioxide, burning carbon fuels, etc. We really have to wake up and take proper stewardship of ourselves and of the planet at large. And that's what I think this gigantic awakening in consciousness is truly all about.
Indeed. When we actually notice that we have a consciousness, you wake up and you actually tap into this idea. You don't just get on with life as you've been doing for years and years and years. You actually notice that you are a conscious being, which has this incredible vehicle inside of consciousness or outside of. We'll talk about where consciousness is in a moment. But it's extraordinary that we don't give more awareness to the fact that we have this responsibility, and that with our thoughts and our intentions and our words and our actions, we have huge impact. And rather than getting lost in the day-to-day routines and patterns that we choose to do as human beings, this mass waking up, which seems to be happening, is very comforting to think that we are becoming more aware of our conscious activities, and that what we think about really matters. And it amazes me that we are in 2022, in the majority of the global population, people are not that aware of the impact that they can have, and the impact that they do have as a common collective of a oneness. If we guide ourselves in a positive direction to care for one another. Some days I wake up, I think just today, everyone I'm going to come into contact with, I'm going to shower with kindness, compassion, unconditional love, and at my presence, my attention. Just that one thing, I did it today actually, and I noticed how people respond to me differently. They have a different feeling, they have a different reaction, but this is not something that is normal that people do in everyday life. But how wonderful it would be if we were growing up in a new space where these kind of conversations are everyday-ish, to talk about being more compassionate, being more loving, saying a prayer, knowing that that has power, knowing that that will work. And it's not connected to a religious paradigm, but rather is connected to a spiritual one. We learn through quantum physics, we learn through science, we learn through the spiritual world and the ancient texts that the power of what goes on through our consciousness, housed in our mind, I guess, we'll speak about that in a minute, that has huge potentiality to heal, to change, to transform. And this has been known about for generations, and yet somehow has become quite squashed.
Well, I would say a lot of the momentum of this kind of awakening is an acknowledgement, kind of from a scientific perspective, based on the empirical data, that in fact our consciousness is shared. I mean, that's one of the most beautiful lessons that comes out of near-death experiences from the life review. I mean, a life review, your life flashing before your eyes. That's not a new concept. That goes all the way back at least 2,400 years to the time of Plato, who wrote about Armenian soldier killed in battle. And he was put on a funeral pyre, and right before they lit it up, he woke up. And his message was very simple. He said, when you die, your life flashes before your eyes, and you find the only thing that's important is how much love you were able to hand out to others. So the NDE for a long time has been concerned with this concept of the binding force of love. And when you listen to modern NDE accounts and life reviews, what really strikes me is this common theme that you experience it not from your own perspective, but from the emotional perspective of those who are influenced by your actions and thoughts. So, in other words, life review shows us that the boundaries of self, in many ways, are a fiction that is drawn up to allow learning and teaching as individual souls working as groups, but that ultimately the evidence is there that we are all sharing one mind. I mean, so many NDE accounts talk about people having an overlap of mental experience, both with people in the physical plane still alive and also with loved ones who have left the physical plane. So, in many ways, that mental layer is an integrative layer where we connect with souls of many, those who are still alive, those who are not. And all of it contributes in this life review towards kind of assessing our life and doing a mid-course correction. But the interesting thing is this notion of the one mind is very powerful. In fact, Karen and I, our current definition of spirituality is very simple. It just includes a notion of this connectedness of mind, that we're all really in this together, and that we discover that in extreme situations like NDEs, about this overlap with other mental space of others. And it shows us we're sharing the dream of the one mind. That is really a beautiful way of putting it. And it opens the door to free will. Remember that materialist science that I had worshiped before my coma, conventional materialist neuroscience, would laugh at you if you claim to have free will. They think it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, this illusion of conscious awareness, but with absolutely no agency in changing the evolving reality that we face. And I would say that's the bleak and paltry fiction of materialism. And it's should have died 80 years ago with the advent of quantum physics, which completely opens the door wide to free will in sentient beings. It dies hard because people hold on tightly to their beliefs, no matter how those beliefs might be out of alignment with the empirical data. But that's why those BigelowInstitute.org reports are so important. They show you the scientific discussion has already moved well beyond whether or not the afterlife and reincarnation are real. Those things are real. So now it's time, based on kind of the Bigelow science and where they're headed with their research initiatives, to go into the next level of understanding of how all this really works. But you can no longer rationally deny the reality of these experiences based on the hard, solid evidence in all those Bigelow reports and like-minded research going on around the world, even as we speak.
And let's hope this idea and this message ripples through fast, because it's taken a very long time for people to still have these blinkers on. To the stage that, I spent years not talking about my experience because I was worried about what everyone was going to say. And they did, there was a lot of raised eyebrows. It started in hospital where I started talking to doctors about it. They couldn't, I actually asked one of the doctors to collaborate with me, looking at my brain scans and so on for my book. And they didn't want to, they couldn't go there. They could not go there, which is, the sorry state of our awakening at this point in history, I guess, and for whatever reason we are where we are. But it's joyful to be able to notice now there are so many more conversations like the one that you and I are having, and our ability to speak globally very easily and emit these kind of ideas very fast now, thanks to technology, that we can actually share these real life experiences. I'd like to ask you what your thoughts are about where is consciousness? Where is it housed?
Well, that's probably a better question is, where is the physical universe?
Yeah.
Because actually consciousness is the ultimate kind of thing that exists. I mean, I would say we're sharing the self-awareness that is a property of the universe at large. It pre-exists the Big Bang, pre-exists the beginning of time, however you want to look at it. But that consciousness is the thing that exists. And
That's a
then the
beautiful,
physical,
beautiful way of looking at it, actually, isn't it?
well, it's the thing that makes the most sense. And then the physical universe is what emerges from consciousness, from that field of consciousness. And so what we see is all this world out there, but never forget, as we make clear in our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, it was co-written with my life partner, Karen Newell. We make it very clear this primacy of mind allows you to have a much deeper understanding of things like will and healing, and our kind of these exotic things like near death and shared death experiences. You know, shared death experiences are just like near death in their qualities, but they happen in perfectly healthy, normal people. Often, when a loved one is dying, the bystander soul could be 1,000 miles away. Distance doesn't matter in that realm. But what happens is the soul that's leaving the physical world will go by and grab that bystander soul, take them along, even to witnessing a life review of the dying soul. And then the bystander soul comes back to this world. And how do you explain those kind of things? And I've heard many of those accounts from people who'd come up to me after one of my talks and say, I've never told anybody this before, but. And then they'd share a story like that with me that was just absolutely astonishing about the nature of reality. And shared death, near death, these are all very well studied in a scientific sense. And as I said, that Bigelow Institute evidence is really overwhelming. You can't read that and then still come away thinking that materialism is still the correct answer, because there's just way too much evidence when you look from quantum physics, from the viewpoint of neuroscience and the hard problem of consciousness, look from the viewpoint of philosophy of mind and what's known as the binding or combination problem, and the difficulty with trying to explain how this unified consciousness within an individual could be the result of all these different neuronal populations doing their thing. There's something much deeper going on, and the brain is not producing consciousness so much as serving as a filter. It's called filter theory. We discuss it in great detail in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And I think that's really where the action is this notion of idealism, of the primacy of consciousness in the universe, this God force mind that we're sharing is one that has tremendous influence. And the more we kind of rise above our ego self, the more we realize that what we normally perceive as limitations of human ability of acquiring information and on acting on the world at large, just thinking we do it through our body alone is not true. And there's a lot of evidence for distance healing, power of prayer, things like that. Then, of course, you have all the evidence for non-local consciousness in parapsychology, things like telepathy, remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, precognition, presentiment, psychokinesis, distance healing, as we mentioned, and then, of course, near-death, shared-death experiences, and, of course, that extreme literature out of the University of Virginia from uvadops.org over more than 6 decades, with more than 2,700 cases of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation, of which they have solved 1,700. That is, they've actually found the prior person truly lived, the one that's described by the child. And when you read this literature, you realize, although there might be an occasional case of fabrication and fraud in there somewhere, the vast majority of this is very rigorously analyzed data that was specifically set up to avoid fraud and false claims and any kind of misleading information. And when you read that literature, it is shocking how all this evidence lines up to show us the primacy of consciousness and how the brain works mainly as a filter, is a beautiful model to explain it all. And that's where we go, and a lot of other modern scientists writing about this go in that same direction. But Living in a Mindful Universe puts all of this material together into a coherent package.
So we're going to put these links you're referring to, because I know people want to have a look. We'll put them in the show notes. And I'd also like to cover, you've written 3 enormously empowering and powerful books. I'd like us just to chat through them. The first one that got me connected with you is Proof of Heaven. And this was really looking at, it's a New York Times bestseller title, and I found it immensely interesting gateway into this whole NDE concept. So would you speak a little about this book?
Well, yeah, Proof of Heaven was really my first attempt to tell my story. I mean, as the book says, by 4 months post-coma, I had a recognition based on a photograph of a birth sister, basically, that helped me to firm up the reality of this incredible journey I had been on. And so from that point forward, I knew the reality of it, but trying to understand how to fit it into a scientific framework has been a tremendous challenge. So for me, the book Proof of Heaven was a little more of a question mark. And the book Living in a Mindful Universe really takes us the much greater distance towards uniting science and spirituality to prove all this. But I think the important things to point out about Proof of Heaven, I knew that this story would be big someday. I thought it would take years to get there. So I was quite surprised when the book Proof of Heaven hit #1 on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list the first week it came out. And in fact, over the next 2 years, it was #1 on that list 42 times. So it's clearly struck a chord with many people around the world because it's been published in 40 plus languages now. And I think the other important thing to point out about that book, we were at a conference in Belgium, a scientific conference, and one of the neuroscientists there put up a graph and showed how the number of scientific papers around the world on near-death experiences had quadrupled after the book Proof of Heaven came out. And they showed that a PubMed search um, revealed a certain number of papers. I can't remember the exact number, maybe 120 papers in the 32 years before Proof of Heaven came out. And then a fourfold increase in that rate after Proof of Heaven. Now, I don't know if the book was responsible for that or was just published at a very opportune time, but the reality is the scientific community is waking up to this. And I would say, especially if you look at the work of like Ed Kelly, uvadops.org, and especially his 3 books, his trilogy of scientific books, Irreducible Mind in 2007, Beyond Physicalism in 2015, and then Consciousness Unbound in 2021. You will see a steady progression of scientific thinking and refinement to explain all this. But we've gone long beyond doubting it because the evidence is so overwhelming. And it's now really time to educate this society and wake everyone up to this much deeper, profound truth, because it has everything to do with our success as human beings trying to navigate this world, to have this deeper understanding of our relationship with the universe and fundamentally who we are and what is our purpose for being here. And those are the kind of things that can be answered through this much deeper investigation of the nature of human consciousness.
Wonderful. And on this macro level, how we deal with each other, the importance of being able to offer gratitude, compassion, kindness, based on the fact that we are all one, we're not separate individuals. And that concept in itself makes war absolutely the most ridiculous concept that is still peddled in so many places around the world. And it makes no sense when set into this paradigm of life and what the world is truly about, and we as human beings and our responsibility.
Well, I would say the sad truth is that what we have now are some kindergarten level thinkers, very immature thinkers who are heading countries like Russia, China, and in the U.S. we've had our own adventure with that kind of thing. And when these little kindergartners who are frustrated and mad and angry at the world, they're very immature. These world leaders who threaten war and taking over other countries. I mean, they are pathetic, little embarrassing, just immature. I mean, that's the best word I can use for it. And it's time to grow up.
Grow up.
I
Yeah.
I I love one of the things that,
to problems, the solution to problems is not going around fighting each other, shouting at each other, aiming missiles at each other. That is not a solution, but rather understanding the construct of who we are, what humanity is about, what consciousness is about, what we're here to do as human beings, and to step up to that.
Well, I would say that all that conflict is really the result of materialist thinking, because materialism gives us this false sense of separation, that we're all separate beings. Whereas NDEs and a modern quantum-informed version of understanding of the science of consciousness leads us to on seeing this oneness, this connectedness. I love Larry Dossey's book, One Mind, because it makes this point very clearly. It's not just human consciousness, but that consciousness is shared with animals and shared across the natural world. So we really need to grow up to that. And one of the things that Karen and I do to try and break down these boundaries is to help people with deep meditation using differential frequency brainwave entrainment. And for people who want to learn any more about that, sacredacoustics.com is her website. And I was first drawn to this technology about 2 years after my coma. I'd read many, many books and come to realize that the only way to come to a deeper understanding of my own journey was to meditate, centering prayer, going within, exploring consciousness. Um, and I would say through our workshops, what we've demonstrated is that people don't even have to have a near-death experience to come to a much deeper understanding of this reality that I am talking about. By being a conscious being, we can use powerful meditative tools like sacred acoustics, and that can help us get into this sense of oneness, traversing that veil, and much more living this kind of quantum informed conscious idea of the one mind, and that to hurt another is to hurt ourself. That's what the life review and NDEs teaches us so clearly. And once the science of consciousness goes way out there in terms of proving the reality of NDEs and life reviews and all of that, we must pay attention to the deep lessons that we learn from those same extraordinary human experiences. And they are here to teach us to live as one. If we hurt another, we're hurting ourselves. And that is something that is crystal clear in the NDE world, especially when you realize that life reviews are just the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, written into the very fabric of the universe, because that is the deep lesson of NDEs and of the science of consciousness, is we're all in this together. We need to take care of each other, show kindness, mercy, acceptance, and ultimately, as humanity accepts this deep lesson, we will have to shift the way we treat animals, because animals are obviously part of the spiritual world too. And humans have not treated animals as fellow spiritual beings, and we will grow into that as humanity matures into this deeper understanding of our true nature.
Absolutely. And are you optimistic about our direction?
Well, I'm actually very optimistic, but that optimism is entirely based on a knowing that this awakening is happening, that the scientific world is shifting dramatically, and that our culture will ultimately realize that we're all truly in this together and we must take care of each other. And if we don't do that well, we are not going to have a very pleasant life review, because it's going to try to nudge us back into a direction of love, kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, and when necessary, forgiveness. And of course, never forget gratitude. I think gratitude and forgiveness are two of the most underutilized powers that we have as human beings to improve our kind of spiritual growth and lives. And to me, it's been just a tremendous benefit to adopt this view of idealism and this notion of top-down causality, and realize we are sharing with the mind of the universe. And that's what gives us the ability to bring this binding force of love into practice and serve as a conduit for that love in improving this world around us with everything we do day in, day out.
And with a responsibility for that. I think it's a wonderful roundup to think of what these experiences that we've been through have taught us. And I've always loved the Hermetics philosophy, which the opening chapter, Hermetics, being all is mind, mind is all. And thinking of our universe that we're within, being this one, just one mind, this alters our thinking about everything and will direct us into a direction that is more kind, more generous, more forgiving, more compassionate, more based in unconditional love. And if we can understand that concept and really get that clear in our minds, then we have hope for being able to create a more beautiful future for all of us and for our children and our children's children.
Well,
Eben, I can't thank you enough for this wonderful talk. I really have loved talking to you so much and finding out these shared experiences. The fact that, you know, when I got for my NDE, we are all one. We are here to serve and to help each other and really to act with kindness. So I have loved being able to talk about these topics with you, and I'd like to put in the show notes all of the links that we spoke about today, so that
well,
people
thank you very,
can.
very much. It's been great talking with you too. And the only other one I would add to that is Karen
Yes,
and I, during the pandemic, did a
yes,
series of interviews with a lot of our colleagues who we would have met, but all the trips were canceled. And these are scientists from around the world, very well respected studiers of consciousness, other experiencers, people like that. That can all be accessed at unitedinhopeandhealing.com. Those are available for free, those interviews, and I think they're very enlightening to help people get up to speed with all this. And then just ebenalexander.com and sacredacoustics.com. I think with those websites, people will have plenty of ways to contact us and find out a lot more about what we're up to.
fantastic. And inviting people to have a look at these 3 books: The Proof of Heaven, The Map of Heaven, Living in a Mindful Universe. Wonderful reading, well worth, highly recommended. Have a look at these as well. So in the show notes, I'll put all of the links that we referred to today, so that you can have access and dig in, because just this is the topic of life. I think when we scratch the surface and begin to explore this area of consciousness, it's the biggest service we can be in. So I think it's
Absolutely. Well, that's beautifully put, and thanks for all that you do to get this out there. That's a wonderful mission you're on, and
yeah, love
I
it.
just love your energy and your experience lends a lot of light to this whole topic. So thanks for sharing every bit of it.
Likewise, thank you. All right, well, much love, and we'll be in touch. And thank you for the listeners for listening. I hope you enjoy. Well, I know you will have enjoyed this chat. So love to all. Thank you. Thank you. Ciao.
Bye bye. Thanks.
Thank you.